We took the rest of that day off after I returned from my adventure, and the next morning we left San Pedro, and on the way out we stopped at Valle de la Luna, which is a really spectacular kind of area of rock formations and sand dunes, and I had a nice ride through there. It was off-road, and Jess wasn't interested in any more off-road for a little while. While I was riding through Valle de la Luna, I met a guy named Camilo who was riding down on his Yamaha from Colombia, and he's doing a really cool thing because he has one of these drones. Basically, it's like a quadricopter. It's got 4 propellers, one on each corner, and it hovers, and really cool remote control. And so he puts his GoPro up to it and he sends it up in the air, and whenever he's at these really scenic areas, he's got his own mirador in the sky, and he's able to take incredible pictures. So it was really cool spending a few minutes with him and seeing how he does it.
So leaving San Pedro de Atacama, we decided to go back through Calama, where we had stayed a few nights before, and then on to Antofagasta.
On the way south to Antofagasta, we passed this area where there is basically what they call an ex-pueblo. It was a town and is no longer a town, called Pampa Union. And it was just kind of weird to see in the middle of the desert these half-crumbled houses and the vestiges of life. The Atacama Desert is well known for being the driest place on Earth, driest desert on Earth. And one good thing about that is it's really good for looking up at the night sky. There's no moisture in the air, so you can see really clearly straight up to the sky with very little distortion. South of Antofagasta, we visited the very large telescope of the European Southern Observatory. It's on Cerro Paranal, I think, something like that it's called. Anyway, it's really cool. It's in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around.
Yeah, it's way up on the top of the mountains.
Yeah, on the top of this hill, and the telescope units are up at the top, and just down below are the kind of housing area. And unfortunately, tours are only on Saturday.
Yeah,
so
and we were
had to see
there
it
on
from
a Thursday.
Yeah, we had to see it from a distance.
Yeah.
We continued taking the main highway south, past the town of Chañaral. We were going along the coast, and we decided that it would be a good place to camp for the night, so we pulled off onto one of the side roads, where there's actually a lot of people that have kind of made it their unofficial home. I mean, there's no, there's shacks and tents and random things, but we found a nice kind of secluded area.
Yeah, with some rocks, yeah, a little bit further from the ocean.
Yeah, and I managed to ride the bikes out onto the
sand.
Out onto the sand without any incident, without getting stuck. And we pitched a tent and had a nice night of camping.
Yeah.
The next day we continued south, going on the Panamericana Norte, which is the main highway. After Caldera, the highway goes inland, and we followed it inland for a while, but decided that it was just kind of long, boring desert stretches. So we found ourselves a kind of a secondary highway that led us back to the coast. It was tarmac for about half the way, and then some fun off-road dirt stretches for another half the way.
Yeah.
And then we got to the coast where there is the Circuito Costanero, which is basically a circuit that runs along the coast and connects all the little towns and kind of beaches and campsites that are along there. So we had a really nice road, and it's an improved dirt road, so it's hard packed and good running, but it does get a lot of ripples, I guess, from tire tracks and everything. But it was still a fun stretch.
We went along the coast until Huasco, and then we started going inland towards Vallenar.
The Valle de Huasco is a beautiful kind of region of some wine and lots of olive production. So now we're starting to see the olive orchards and vineyards. The scene starts to change from one of desert to a little more growth. From Vallenar, we continued south on Route 5 until we reached La Serena, and then we kind of cut inland again to do another detour, another circuit. We continued on Route 41 until Vicuña, and at the town of Vicuña, we cut in south again. And this was just a gorgeous dirt road stretch that really was one of the best. It winds through hills and mountains, and so you've got these switchbacks up a nice graded dirt road, little gravelly in some sections, but just beautiful scenery, lovely area, and also this region, which is kind of a cross between desert and arid production lands. This is where we were seeing some vineyards again. And so it was lovely to just ride through the mountains, seeing the vineyards.
Yeah, and then you could see where they put all of the grapes out, and they were drying the grapes, and you could smell all of it as you were passing by.
That's right. And at one point, we even passed an area where a truck had passed that was carrying pomegranates. And you can just imagine how the truck was rumbling along, and it was full to the brim, and pomegranates were falling off all over the place and cracking open. So when we got there, there was this actually like red stained part of the road that was just covered with kind of pomegranate corpses, and it was just really out of the blue. Our only thought was, are any of these whole enough that we could eat them? And if not, where is the local pomegranate orchard that we can go steal some? About halfway down this dirt road, from Vicuña to where it exits at Ovalle, is Hurtado. And this is kind of the main town of this stretch, and it's a cute little town. But just beyond it, we saw a sign for Hacienda Los Andes. And it's like a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, German bed and breakfast.
Owned by a German couple. They actually have a few small telescopes up on the side of the hill that you can use. And they just have beautiful grounds. They do horseback riding. There's trails for hiking around there. And we just absolutely could not resist, not only to stay there for the night, but to spend
have a rest day.
Have a rest day and just take it easy the following day. And it was just a lovely kind of interlude. Leaving Hacienda Los Andes, we continued south. Now the road gets smoother. It quickly turns into tarmac, and then you hit Ovalle. After Ovalle, we continued south, again inland. We passed Monte Patria, where there's a lovely reservoir. And for the whole rest of the day, we continued kind of weaving through valleys and along mountains at nice high-speed tarmac, and just beautiful, pleasant riding. On our way towards the coast again, I was riding along. My mind was wandering. I was thinking actually that we are only about a day away from Santiago, that the trip is coming to an end, and I was a little depressed, and I was thinking about what we're going to do next. And so my mind wandering, I was going 120, 130 kilometers an hour, and all of a sudden a fairly sharp turn comes up in the road, and I'm just not able to stop quick enough. So I veer into the oncoming lane, seeing that there's no other vehicles coming. But that still wasn't quite enough. And so I went into the shoulder as well, which was all gravel. And hitting the gravel, my rear tires started skidding out, my brakes weren't working as they should, and my bike went down. I went down on the right side, and with so much speed, because I still must have been going 80 kilometers an hour when I hit down, the bike was scraping along and then flipped over to the left side. As it flipped, of course, I felt and saw myself thrown forward, and I flew through the air, face first basically, and came skidding to the stop on the ground. Meanwhile, as my bike flipped over, and it, of course, came to a stop just behind me. And I kind of came out of that a little bit dazed, but realizing that I'd had a really, really big crash.
And so I was coming up behind him. Greg had already sped forward, and he is passing a number of cars, so he was quite a bit ahead of me. But as I rounded that corner, I saw him. He was in the opposing lane, his bike was on the ground, and he was trying to lift it himself. And then I realized, oh crap, he got himself into an accident. And so I pulled off to the side, and I was getting all worried. And then the car behind me, he pulled off to the side as well. I got off my bike, and he got out of his car, and we both came over to the bike and was helping Greg lift the bike up. And we were able to push it off onto the shoulder.
Shortly thereafter, a couple of carabineros, which are like Chilean national police, had come by, and they checked to see if everything was okay. But there was apparently a much worse and bigger accident further along, so they were kind of in a hurry, and when they saw I was okay, they continued. So then we were left alone and I'll admit that I had a bit of a fall apart, a bit of a breakdown. Not really because of, I think, the danger to myself or that I was, you know, in such bad shape, but really just the kind of culmination of the bad thoughts I was thinking before I had the crash, and, you know, what's going to happen next. And one of the big things was that, you know, as I was thinking about the uncertainty of what we were going to do next, where we're going to go, where we're going to find jobs, the one kind of thing that I had was that my bike, my gear, everything was still in good shape. Like, you know, for all the uncertainty going on, that was a certainty. And in an instant, that was no longer a certainty. And that just kind of hit me really hard that, you know, everything is kind of is a little broken now. Physically, I was extremely lucky. This is my second kind of big motorcycle accident. The first one happened maybe a week after I first gotten my motorcycle license, when I was rear-ended by a gorgeous young girl who obviously was talking on the cell phone and didn't see the red light that I was stopped at. I probably lost one of my 9 motorcycling lives on that one, and I definitely lost the second of my 9 motorcycling lives on this one. I sustained really no major injury at all. I had a bit of a gash on kind of the left side of my hip or pelvis. I had a bruise on my thigh, and a bit of a bruise on the shoulder, and a bruise on the forearm. So I could absolutely feel where I went down, but the riding gear protected me incredibly well. I scraped the riding gear up really good, and of course that kind of is no longer waterproof, certainly, but it absolutely did its job and really kept me whole. A review of the bike really found that actually it was in surprisingly good shape. The crash bars, which are on the sides, had taken the majority of the beating. They did their job beautifully. The panniers, the aluminum panniers, had been really beat to hell, but they had also taken the brunt of it, especially when the bike flipped over. The windshield was broken because during the flip, of course, the bike had hit the windshield and that gave out. No scratches on my bike, and this really upsets Jess because in the few good falls that she's had,
you scraped the paint
she scraped the paint up a bit, but
and his was perfect.
But all in all, the bike was in really good shape. I had bent the handlebars
very badly.
Yeah, that was I mean, they were bent, but the steering was still straight, so I was able to ride off from there. The bike actually rode perfectly fine.
So that night we still had to continue on to the next town, which was Los Vilos, which is where we stayed for the night in a little cabana, which was only about maybe about 50 kilometers away from the crash.
From Los Vilos, it was about 250 kilometers to Santiago, so less than a full day's ride. The one complication was that my bike, you know, was a bit beat up, although she was really still riding true. But without a windshield, it was making it a bit tricky. But we eventually made it to Santiago, kind of 3-4 o'clock.
Yeah.
We had booked a few nights at a local hostel. Jess and I are decidedly not hostile people. But very quickly, Jess got on the ball and looked up apartment rentals.
Yeah, and I actually started looking up at the same website that I found our vacation rental that we were in Colorado before we went to Liberia. And I found a great place, a little 1-bedroom apartment, a nice kitchen on the 17th floor with a nice view of the city.
And the mountains and the Andes.
Yeah, and parking for our bikes.
So it was a fantastic trip. It spanned about 180 days, so more than 6 months. We did 32,000 kilometers, and I think just had a fantastic time. So now, unfortunately, as much as it absolutely pains me to say that the trip is over, but now is into the next phase, and we don't know what that's going to be yet, but we're getting excited about it, and we've got this nice place while we kind of figure out what's going to happen next.
Yeah.